Welcome to the Two Button Group podcast. This is Scott. Glen, how are you?
I am doing all right. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here talking about Metroid on episode 30 of the podcast. That's a nice round number. I think we should give ourselves a quick pat on the back. Is that coming through? Yeah. No, this is great. Two Button Crew obviously used to be a daily show on YouTube. We've slowed down the output quite a bit, but it's nice to still be able to do 30 podcasts by now. And I'm just excited.
Took us several years.
It did, yes.
Our first one was Breath of the Wild. Wow. It's taken us like 4 years to get to 30.
Well, when we make a podcast, we don't just poop it out. We don't just talk about the latest news of the week or anything like that. We go deep. Mm-hmm. And this time we're going deep on Metroid Zero Mission. So it's very in vogue right now in the Nintendo fandom to replay some of the original Metroid games in the wait period for Metroid Dread, which is almost done. So this is exciting. Mm-hmm. Metroid is one of those few Nintendo franchises that you can actually attainably play them all. So I've been working on that. How many have you played?
I would say I've played all of the main series. I think the only ones I haven't played are Prime Hunters, Federation Force, and Pinball.
Okay, so others? The handheld spin-offs, basically.
Yeah, basically.
I've played those three. I think the one that I haven't played is the original Metroid 2. We've talked about the remake on the podcast before, and I've played through Samus Returns, but I haven't played Return of Samus. And I don't know if that's necessary. I feel like that one would be a little painful to come back to.
Yeah, it's I would say it's better than the original NES Metroid in terms of how easy it is to get into for a modern, someone who's used to the modern Metroid games. But it definitely does have some of the old school jank.
Yeah, speaking of painful to go back to, the original Metroid, I think I reviewed that for Two Button Crew and gave it a 5 out of 10. It's pretty rough with the slowdown, frame rate issues, and primarily the lack of map. So I was very glad to see that it was remade as Metroid Zero Mission for Game Boy Advance, and boy, is that a better way to experience the first Metroid game.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So if you're trying to do your homework and play some Metroid before Dread, which is Metroid 5, then I think the best way to do it is Metroid Zero Mission on Wii U Virtual Console, Metroid Samus Returns for 3DS.
Assuming you want to stick to official stuff, I personally liked AM2R, another Metroid 2 remake, a little bit better. And believe it or not, that's not only still available, but fans of AM2R have been updating it, so it actually has more content than when it was first released.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. So
that came out.
If you want to make sure that Nintendo gets, you render unto Caesar, so to speak. Definitely Samus Returns.
Then for the third entry, you'd play Metroid. Super Metroid, excuse me. You can play that on the SNES Classic Edition or Switch Online or Wii U Virtual Console, but there's other more accessible ways to play that one. And that would bring you to Metroid 4, which is called Fusion, and that's also downloadable on Wii U. So Wii U is a really good way to do some Metroid back catalog homework, and that could also include downloading Metroid Prime Trilogy. You don't have to wait for Nintendo to bring that to Switch if you don't want to. And some of those that you're missing in your backlog, Glen, well, I don't know if you would consider, Hunters in your backlog as something you'd actually want to play, but you could buy it on Wii U if you wanted to.
I mean, if they were to port it to like Switch with motion controllers or something, I might consider it. But I remember playing some demos of it at Target way back in the day, and you have to have like 3 hands to enjoy it properly.
I did just play pinball, and that's a pretty good time. So I'd recommend that one. But there's no shortage of ways to enjoy Metroid now. It's a great time to be a Metroid fan. And Glenn, how excited are you for Dread?
I am pretty excited. There are some things about it that I'm looking at. I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy that part in particular. So there is. I think dread's a bit of a strong word, but there is a trepidation there. But for the most part, I'm pretty excited for it because it's been forever since we've had a new 2D Metroid game, and to not only get a new 2D Metroid game, but the game that occurs chronologically after Metroid Fusion, which I've written back in the past about how weird it is that Nintendo hasn't followed that up, because it's a very interesting place in the story.
Yeah, I recall that being one of your biggest wish list items for the longest time. So we were both talking about what can we do to kind of celebrate the series, get ready for the 5th chronological entry, and we thought it would be a good opportunity for us both to play Metroid Zero Mission for the first time. So we spent $8 a piece, downloaded it on the Wii U, and I say let's dive into it. So one of the biggest appeals of Metroid is just the gameplay. It's a series that has spawned its whole kind of subgenre that many indies and other companies try to replicate. So there's something just very reliable and comforting about the basics of the gameplay in the Metroid series. So that's some combat, some exploration. What would you say typifies the basics of a Metroid game?
So a Metroid game, well, because of Metroid Prime, it's a little bit tricky, but I'm going to say for a 2D Metroid game, it's a side scroller, and I would say it's notable in that for the fact that its structure has obstacles. And you have to get around those obstacles with new abilities. And that could just be a ledge that's too high to climb, or it could be like a type of wall or something that can only be destroyed with a certain type of weapon. And I think that's really, really the appeal of a Metroid game, or a Metroidvania, as they've come to be known, because the Castlevania games back in like the PlayStation 1 period kind of adopted a structure very similar to that. I think that's a major appeal, is walking around, seeing something that doesn't quite make that doesn't quite, like, you don't really know how to deal with it. It's like, okay, there's clearly something on the other side of this, but I can't get past it, and kind of making a mental note of that and coming back to it later once you have the ability to deal with that.
Yeah, most people might refer to that as backtracking, but I don't think that word quite encompasses what it's like, because you feel very powerful once you return to an area with other stronger upgrades and weapons and are able to access new places and power-ups. And of course, as you're going through the map, you're revealing more locations, you're exploring and getting into new areas that you weren't able to before. To me, in the opening minutes, I definitely recognized that it was lifted from the original Metroid. You go left, get the morph ball, but I think pretty soon after that, it was just registering for me as like a whole new experience. But how about you? As you were going through the game, did you recognize the kind of layout?
Yeah, so I've played the original Metroid all the way through probably 3 times, though it's been years. Let me make that clear. And so a lot of the areas are very familiar. I'm not going to say it's a 1-for-1 match, because one, they did expand on the game quite a bit, so there are a lot of new areas, and a lot of the areas have like new obstacles and stuff to make use of new power-ups and the like that they've added. But for the most part, it's still very familiar. Like, you can still see sort of the thumbprint of the original game on it, and it's like, oh, I'm in this room that has like these weird tall tubes or whatever, and now I actually have higher definition graphics, so I know what those are supposed to look like or how they behave. So a lot of the areas are very, very recognizable. It's definitely not a 1-for-1, because they've also added things like slopes and inclines and like that weren't really. I mean, you could do them on the NES, but You typically don't see those until games that are later in the NES life cycle.
Like the difference between Mario Bros. 1 and 3.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of work just went into differentiating some of the environments.
Yeah,
because
the original Metroid, one of the chief complaints I have for it is it's very, very repetitive. In this game, each area feels distinct, it feels different, and you can kind of like... It's one of those games that, and I love it when games do this, where you can kind of just look at a screenshot and go, oh yeah, it's that part of the game.
Yep. And you'd have to play with a guide through the original Metroid, or at least I would. I shouldn't speak for everybody, but just because everything looks so similar and because there's no map, even when I'm reading walkthroughs, it's like, okay, go through the orange horizontal tunnel number 3, because there's like a bunch of other ones that look exactly like it. So I just appreciated it about Zero Mission that they made it much more unique and memorable as you're exploring. So what do you think about the pace of like getting upgrades and progressing through the game?
So man, this is a really good game if you need like a quick dopamine hit, because especially in the early portions, you're just finding stuff left and right. You're finding either like missile tanks, or you're finding new power-ups. So I would say like in the first 30 minutes, you get like 3 or 4 new abilities.
Yeah, even traversal ones. Like I think I remember getting a high jump way earlier than I thought I would.
Yeah, well, actually, it's weird. I seem to recall getting the high jump earlier in the original game, but I may be misremembering it. That is one thing I've noticed, is that I think the sequence is a lot more set in stone than it is in the original game.
Right.
So the game does kind of, and I have seen sequence breaks. It's not hard, but there is like an expected sequence that you're going to go through.
Right.
But just one more thing I want to say is also, because the controls in this game are a lot better, and the new abilities some of the new abilities Samus has, like the ability to grab ledges, which is a power-up you have to find, unlike in Fusion, which is, I thought was kind of weird that they took that away. It's just a lot easier to get around in this game. Like in the original Metroid, if you wanted to get from one side of Brinstar to the other, or whatever, that would probably take you like 5 minutes, just because of how slow Samus moves and how slippery the controls are and how hard it is to take out enemies. And then, in this game, it's probably going to be like 60 seconds at most. So you can run around the map very quickly.
Yeah, the progression is really quick. I appreciate that. And I think the whole game might have taken me 8 hours. It was between 5 and 8. I'm having trouble remembering exactly.
I think it was like 6.5 to 7 for me.
Okay.
It's not a long game.
I'd say it's a nice size.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind that for me, at least, that was getting all of the items.
Okay. You 100%ed it. Wow. With a guide or on your own?
I used a guide towards the end. Because first of all, the game doesn't tell you how many power bombs there are. They're like, I want to say the maximum number you can hold, and you get like 2 per bomb tank. The maximum number you can hold is 18, which is kind of a counterintuitive number.
Yeah.
And there's some that I just never would have figured out on my own. Like there's, whoever designed this game really, really liked shine sparking. Because like I would say half of the late game power-ups, like, or in-game power-ups, or however you want to express that, require shine sparking. And sometimes it's kind of clever, where it's like you have to learn, I can shine spark while in a morph ball. But there's this one where you have to do like this crazy complicated sequence that's just like 6 shine sparks in a row. And that, I confess, I used save states for that. That was the only time in the game I used save states, and I have 0 regrets.
Well, I did not 100%, probably not even close. I think it was about 60% of the items that I got, but I enjoy this shine spark. I feel like that's kind of a nod to the more hardcore Metroid fans that they create those puzzles for us to get. One of my favorites was towards the end where you have to shine spark. No, you have to. Okay, I'm remembering now. Mm-hmm. You feel like you have to screw attack through this tunnel without going too high or too low. Without triggering it's like a laser line or something that will
I know what you're talking about.
From getting the E-tank. It's like right before one of the last bosses.
It is right before the final boss.
And then I was like, oh, if I shine spark here, it's much, much easier. So those are... it's hard to pick a different favorite power-up, but I always enjoyed the screw attack and shine spark because it makes backtracking feel a lot more fast and powerful.
Yeah, as for me, I'm not really... Man, I don't even know what power-up would be my favorite. Like, the screw attack does feel pretty good, but just because you can plow through things, and there are a lot of shortcuts that they put in the game for when you get the screw attack.
Oh yeah, lots of little breakable blocks.
I don't know. I'm kind of tempted to say the plasma beam. I know that's a boring response, but it's just at that point you don't have to worry about what weapon you're using for 90% of the enemies. You just shoot them with the plasma beam, and they die.
It is pretty satisfying.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, let's just get this over with. Yeah, so I will say in terms of exploration, there is a point at the end of the game. I've seen this with Metroidvanias. There's a point at the end of the game where the game stops being fun. And it's this point where when you're trying to hunt down everything and you're kind of on those last few, and it just gets really tedious and you're running around in circles going, where is it? I will say, it's weird. Like the main core loop of Metroidvanias is like really satisfying up to a point. And then like if you're trying to get everything, it stops being fun. But also I've noticed that there's like this, once you get enough power-ups, there's kind of this point where you sort of the power-ups stop meaning as much. Have you had that? Because I think for me, it was like when I got the high jump or whatever, it's like, okay, I'm at this kind of comfortable power level where I want to get the next thing so I can get that item that I ran past a while ago. I am kind of... I don't feel like frustrated or limited anymore by my lack of power, and so I feel a little less driven to keep going.
For sure. Yeah, I think that happens. That's why I usually choose not to 100% it, because there's always an excess of missiles. It's very rare for a Metroid player to run out of missiles, especially if they're trying to collect them all. I think it might be a better balance if a normal playthrough got you like 80% of the power-ups, and then the completionist would get the remaining 20. Mm-hmm. And
80-20 rule?
That's a great rule. It's much closer to 50-50 now, I feel like. So it leaves you just a lot of busy work.
Yeah, but yeah, the plasma beam does make backtracking a lot easier, as does the screw attack, because you can just plow through some of the walls. Are just like they were really good about making that so that it's like, oh, you have to go through this very circuitous route the first time, but then on a repeat, when you're going back through for power-ups, there's a really easy shortcut that you can take. I appreciate that.
Yeah, they put a lot of thought into that. Okay, so for Zero Mission, they added additional content to the game as well. Like Glenn said earlier, it's not just a one-to-one recreation of the Metroid game on NES, which is nice. So, of course, there's the famous added end sequence. Can't wait to talk about that, but what else is there, Glenn?
Well, there are a lot of... there are new bosses, there are new powers, and there's the aforementioned end sequence. So... in terms of bosses, the first Metroid only had 3. There was Ridley, there was Kraid, and there was Mother Brain. Which, it isn't really a lot.
No. And I thought Zero Mission had the same 3, so I'm interested for you to tell me what I'm forgetting.
Well, there's the worm that you get the charge beam from.
Yes.
There's I want to say it's in, Kraid's hideout. There's a worm boss that you have to fly, or not fly, but you have to use the zip line over. Yep. There's the bug that you get the super missiles from.
Oh, so basically nameless creatures to kind
Yeah,
of
they're not
pat it out.
names. They're not like the leaders of the space pirates or whatever. But they're boss monsters. I think they have boss music.
What was your experience with the charge beam worm? Because it actually took me multiple encounters to beat that guy.
Yeah. So it did take me multiple times to beat it because you need missiles to harm it, and you only have 5 when you first encounter it. I will say that at a Target kiosk, I did once beat it on the first encounter.
Wow.
Yeah, actually, I think that was the first time I fought it, and then I've never been able to replicate that. So beginner's luck, I guess.
Man, with save states, you could have like tried extra hard to recreate it.
So save states have their place. To me, I don't use save states to get through stuff that I know I can do on my own. I use save states for when the game is just throwing malarkey at me. Let's put it that way.
I see. Well, I was amazed. Like, it probably took me a good 4 encounters with the worm to beat it, and then I got the charge beam. It really took me aback.
You can fight it 4 times?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Like, I thought it wasn't going to run away on that second time, so...
Oh yeah, it goes away because it probably just assumes you ran out of missiles and are going to be stuck. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you can get more missiles in that fight if you shoot like the projectiles it throws or whatever.
That's true. Yep. And I was honestly a little confused. Like, am I able to beat this thing? And then when it finally gave me an actual weapon upgrade, I was really surprised that it was somewhat of an optional encounter for such an important upgrade. So that was cool.
Yep. I'm kind of sad that because this game takes a lot of cues from Metroid Prime in terms of like the music and stuff. I'm a little surprised that they didn't make the charge beam like vacuum up power-ups.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Like, I used the charge beam a lot when I was younger because the idea of expending any limited resource just seemed like an anathema to me. But, when you're older and you can kind of go, oh, I have plenty of these. I did hardly ever use the charge beam except when it was required or when I was, like, using the plasma beam almost exclusively.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting to look at the connections to Metroid Prime, because on first glance, a Nintendo fan might just think of this game as older than Metroid Prime because of Prime being 3D and on the GameCube and whatnot, but Fusion and Prime came out at the same time, and then this game actually followed that, correct?
Yes.
So the developers had all of that Prime experience and inspiration to be able to pull from. Yep. So we'll come back to that when we talk about music, but you said there was also power-ups added to this version?
Yeah, so the charge beam was not in the original game, and there were some power-ups that would seem kind of odd if you didn't play the original game, like the long beam. That was in the original game, and that's why it's in this game. So they kept that, which on one hand I appreciate, and on the other hand I hate the long beam because I should be able to shoot across the screen to begin with. But you don't go long without it. Excuse me for that. Yeah, so they also include some other power-ups like the ledge grab, whatever. I think it's called like the power grip or whatever. They included a bunch at the end of the game. So like at the end of the game you can get the gravity suit and you can get the plasma beam and stuff like that, which were power bombs, which were all introduced later in the series. They also include the speed booster. Am I forgetting anything else? Super missiles weren't in the original. Wow,
they did quite a lot.
Yeah, they basically brought it up to par with like Super Metroid, with maybe a few extra things. No X-ray visor. That was a power-up. That, a lot of people talk about the X-ray visor in Super Metroid like it was stupid or didn't need to be there. I think the people who are saying that are like have memorized where all of the power-up locations are. Because until you get the power bombs, it is really useful having that.
Yeah.
Going, okay, where are the bombable blocks in this room?
Well, this is probably another appropriate place for my traditional confession segment on each podcast. Mm-hmm. I just get these games confused very quickly. And I think it's because so many of the power-ups are equal across games.
Yeah, Metroid actually has a little bit of an innovation problem in that it's basically, there's like, ever since I would say especially Super, but ever since the first game, it's basically been the same set of power-ups rehashed.
Right. And I think that's a reason that it makes it a little hard for me to take the story very seriously. Just that Samus, her life kind of feels like Groundhog's Day. Just wakes up on a planet, crash lands somehow. All of her powers are taken away by whatever mishap. She gets them all back in a similar sequence in similar ways, fighting many of the same bosses. So it's hard for me to actually suspend my disbelief on the chronology of her life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few games that buck that trend. I think Super Metroid, not Super Metroid, Metroid 2, you do start with the Morph Ball, and I think some missiles as well, and a few, like, maybe Morph Ball bombs or something, so you're not starting from zero in that game. But yeah, for the most part, but I look at that, and it's like, well, I don't know if you could really do the series in another way, because if you start with all the power-ups from the previous game, what would be left?
I know, you'd have to be a different character or something. And they have made attempts with games like Metroid Other M that you're not actually picking things up and finding them. You're getting clearance to use them, which no fan was happy with.
No, like it just doesn't make sense when you have to get clearance to use things that are entirely defensive,
right,
or mobility based. I mean, unless like it, I suppose you could argue that there was just that much friction between Samus and Adam that Adam was like, no, you don't do anything unless I tell you to. But they didn't really establish that. It's like Samus just saying, okay, well, I'm, as a token of good faith, I'm going to do this. But she doesn't even say that to Adam at any point, I don't think, or at least not on screen. So,
right.
I mean, I probably should save this if we ever do an Other M podcast, but I don't consider that game canon.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And it's not for the reasons you think. It's not because of the PTSD moments or just the Samus Adam thing.
Well, maybe we'll talk about that someday when it's re-released.
Maybe.
Or maybe it will stay in a dark box in a dark cell alongside the Virtual Boy, and Nintendo will never mention it again.
I like I said, I hope they never mention it again in a sense. Okay, so I did like the gameplay.
Yeah.
There were some stupid decisions in that, but I digress. We're here to talk about a game everybody likes.
True. One last closing thought on Metroid Other M. I think we do need to give Nintendo credit for how much effort they put into it cinematically, and maybe there were missteps with the story, but come on, they gave us a whole, like, voice acting, fully animated sequences, and a movie mode where you can just watch it as one story. So I think that effort should be celebrated, and they should treat story in their other games as importantly in the future. Okay, thanks for joining me down the rabbit hole. We'll go back to talking about the new content in Zero Mission, and shall we get into that end sequence?
Yeah, so this is the part that I think most people remember the game for. I'm going to let you start on this one. What were your thoughts on it? And I guess we should explain what it is first. So you defeat Mother Brain, you escape, and then Samus is shot down by a pirate blockade, and for some reason she doesn't have her suit. I never really understood where it went.
Right. I think she lost all her power-ups as usual, but even more, she lost her suit. It was that bad of a crash. We'll just go with that. I was really excited to experience this because in the marketing leading up to Metroid Dread, which has been substantial, thankfully Nintendo's really getting behind it. They're putting out all these Metroid Dread reports. One of them says that they were trying to create a whole game that felt a lot like the ending sequence in Zero Mission. So what we play in Dread will be directly inspired by this, which is cool. And I think what they're really going for is the feeling of powerlessness, because you're in your Zero suit, and all you have is a paralyzing phaser gun that doesn't actually damage opponents, and you're up against space pirates, which are some of the most dangerous enemies in the game. One hit does 99 damage, right? A whole energy tank.
Yeah, it does a whole energy tank, which I think technically is 100 damage.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, without an energy tank, it's weird because Metroid doesn't give you a full 100 if you have no energy tanks. It gives you 99, and then each energy tank you get increases it by 100. So you're always one away from having an even number when you're on full health.
Yes. So you have to creep through all these kind of labyrinths in the spaceship and try to get back to your power suit. And I feel like that's really going to be the sense you get when you're in a room with Emmy robots in Metroid Dread.
Yeah. So, the thing here is I expected a lot more stealth because I'm not really sure what they were trying to accomplish with this, because there are times where it's very beneficial to be stealthy, and then there are times where they're just like, oh, by the way, you can't sneak past this.
Yeah, you get spotted and you have to run for it.
Yeah, but it's not even that you get spotted. It's like the game forces you in a situation where you fall onto a laser tripwire or something.
Right.
So it's one of those things where you're not even really sure, as you're going through, it's like, is this part avoidable? Like, was I able to sneak past them and I'm now being chased because I made a mistake? Or is this required?
Well, it must have been required. It felt like there were rooms definitely set up for the chase. Like, you can just barely get to the exit first if you stun your enemies in the right times and places. So, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have to admit, I have mixed feelings about this, because, one, there's the sort of incoherent messaging that I mentioned before, and I just don't like being chased. I found this part incredible. Okay, so let me put it this way. I'm not saying that this was a bad sequence. I'm not saying it's a bad part of the game. I think it's a very interesting concept, and I think that it was probably it was a well implemented set piece. It is very memorable, but would I call it enjoyable? No, I wouldn't. I didn't enjoy it personally.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you enjoy getting the suit and going back through the areas with how much power you're given as Samus, being able to shred those space pirates?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those guys had it coming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, it's not a bad set piece. I'm not saying that the game is worse for its inclusion. I think it's better for its inclusion, but it's not what I would call fun. So I don't know. It's a weird analysis of are video games supposed to be entertaining or what? Let me put it this way. I'm glad it was a short, 30-minute, hour-long, however long it took me, sequence.
Well, in that case, I am interested to see how you end up liking Metroid Dread with so much inspiration. Yeah,
that's the reason why. After playing that, and I know you said, I went and played Fusion because Metroid. They say Metroid Dread was inspired by how do we take this idea and stretch it across the entire game? And
you mean Zero Mission?
Right. Sorry, Zero Mission. Fusion did it a lot better because it was a lot more sparing in how it did it, and there was a lot more build up. To give you an idea of Fusion, how effective it was, I had nightmares about being chased, within the context of the game, not even in real life.
Yeah.
But within the context of the game, being chased through wandering just huge corridors.
By SAX.
SAX up until college.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I've already actually had a similar dream about the, what was it called, Emmy?
Yeah.
And it's just oh boy, it begins again.
Well, I think Fusion was great because it was so sparing. You just have those few run-ins with SAX, and they're very impactful. So it could go one way or the other with Metroid Dread. I think it depends on if it's overdone or not.
Yeah, and that's why I'm glad it's going to be reserved to certain areas, but that's why I have I have trepidations about Metroid Dread because, in Zero Mission, the word I would describe these sequences is exhausting. I just found them. It just kind of wore me out. Like it leads to a really good payoff, and it is a very memorable moment. But it is probably, if I replay this game, it is going to be the part where I go, okay, it's time to do this now.
Huh. Well, since Glenn and I are so split on this issue, listener, I think this is a great opportunity for you to comment on our blog or the YouTube version of this podcast. Just let us know what you thought about the added end sequence.
Yeah. But as we mentioned, you do get your power-ups back, and then there's a rest of the game after that. And that's the part that confused me the most, really.
Confused you?
Yeah. Like, a third of the power-ups are not available to you until this part of the game where you only have one thing left to do, and that's fight the final boss.
Uh-huh.
So it's like, why is a third of the game's content, and, not really in terms of areas, but in terms of power-ups, like missile tanks and stuff, why is a third of the game's pickups gated off towards, like, the last 5%? Like, I spent the whole time just going, who made this decision? This is insane.
Well, I think it's better than you just get one more missile pack and go in to fight the last boss.
Well, no, I would be fine. I'm not even saying it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just really weird.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it, it's just like, this was just a strange idea. Because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I have the last power-up, time to go fight Ridley or whatever. Or Mecha Ridley, I think, is the final boss in this game. Spoilers. Time to go fight the final boss. And, like, I think most players would just skip over that without even realizing that was available to them.
Right.
So it's just, it's a very, very bizarre, very lopsided. And, there's still plenty to do before that, but I don't know. I have trouble wrapping my head around that. Because there is a lot to do after you get your power suit back.
There is. Yep. The end game is pretty extensive. Well, should we talk about how the game looks and sounds?
Yep.
Okay. So you've got the moment-to-moment gameplay graphics, which I think are a huge upgrade over NES, of course.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And they look good, scaled up in HD. They still hold up pretty well. That's one thing I love about sprite work, is it's pretty timeless.
I think it depends on the sprite work, but yeah, from games that have a lot of effort put into them, it's pretty timeless.
Then you also had the presentation of cutscenes and story sequences presented to you in kind of a comic way. I thought that was really nice because, of course, you don't get any of that in the original Metroid. So
no, you just get a text scroll at the beginning that's like a memo from the Galactic Federation.
Yep. So as far as a game to learn more about Samus, this one has a lot more to offer.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I did have an issue with the cutscenes is it me or did they feel like they were being played at double speed? Like, they go by quickly.
Yeah.
And like Metroid Fusion, you have that opening cutscene that's just sort of like the title sequence cutscene, I mean, that just sort of takes its time and lets the atmosphere build.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, it's just like, I feel like I'm watching the beginning of, like, watching an action figure commercial, like one of those Lego commercials, Lego City, that's like just super breakneck speed. It's like that if you gave it an upper.
Yeah. Wow. I don't remember registering that mentally, but I'll take your word for it.
I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm like really sensitive to pacing of cutscenes or something like that, because that's something I sometimes have issue with a movie, is like if the opening act of a movie is just too quick, then I kind of feel like I'm spending the rest of the movie reeling.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I had that with An example of a movie that did that is, and it's a good movie, I like it, but Madagascar 2, like very, very fast-paced intros. Like, yeah, let's just get them to Africa as soon as possible. Well, mainland Africa, I should say.
You get a similar feeling when I blow through segments on the podcast?
Yeah, sort of.
All right, so let's talk about the music. Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, another thing I wanted to note about the visual style is it me or did they... There are a ton of like visual effects on Samus. Like she flashes colors whenever you fire a laser, or there's every time you jump, there's an after image.
Right, and then I think that's another reason that you or I or gamers in general may not have used her charge beam as much, just because it's kind of an overwhelming effect with the charging sound and flashing lights doing that. So it's not as comfortable as holding a charge in Mega Man, for example. Mm-hmm.
Well, and the other thing is like, especially on that jump, it feels indulgent to like have the after images whenever Samus jumps. It's like, okay, if you were doing that after you get power up to symbolize the fact that, oh, she's more powerful now, or jumps have more force behind them or something, I could understand that. But just at the start of the game, it's like, this feels wholly unnecessary.
It'd be nice if you could switch that off.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, on a system like the Game Boy Advance where you only have so many resources, stuff like that can be expensive.
Right.
So it's like, why are you dedicating resources to that?
So do tell me about your thoughts on the music in Zero Mission.
I like the music in Zero Mission. I'm going to assume that you just listen to podcasts the whole time.
I didn't. I think I listened to the music of the game and promptly forgot it.
So most of it is based off of the original Metroid soundtrack. It is very Metroid Prime inspired, which I would not say the same for Metroid Fusion. Like Metroid Fusion is very much trying to be its own thing. Mm-hmm. This is very much inspired by Metroid Prime, which I find interesting because it's the Japanese team taking cues from an American production.
Right.
I found that very strange, just because that's not how Nintendo typically operates. But yeah, the music is good. I like it. I think that the arrangements are a massive improvement over the original NES version. Like, I thought the Norfair theme in the original Metroid makes me want to like just go to sleep. It's boring.
Well, quick thought on the Metroid Prime thing. I think this game was probably in development when Prime reviews came out. To rave reviews, especially about the music. I mean, Prime was praised for its gameplay as well, but that's not something you can necessarily emulate in the 2D gameplay version. But the music, you can definitely kind of drag and drop that into this.
I would say my biggest gripe, and this is a minor thing, my biggest gripe with the music is that the escape sequence song... okay, so a little history. The American version of Metroid, the escape sequence music actually has an extra... I'm not musically inclined, so I don't know the term for this, but an extra section that, so it sounds really tense at the beginning, and then the American one has this third movement, or whatever you call it, that is sounds a lot more optimistic and sort of like, okay, you're in danger, but hey, you did it. You're all you have to do is make your escape now, and you're home free. Mm-hmm. And they didn't include that in this version. They just went with the original shorter Japanese version. And there are 2 escape sequences in this game, and I really wish that at least for the second one they did include, as what most people call it, the heroic bit of that song. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, well, after you beat the final boss and you're trying to make your escape and just get to the space pirate like speeder or whatever vessel it is at the end of the game, and escape the ship before, because you're infiltrating the space pirate mothership or whatever, and you have to escape because the self-destruct sequence has been activated. I think that would have been a good place to include that, just as a little nod to both versions of the song. Yeah.
So how do you feel like the audio came together for the package as a whole?
As a whole, I think the mixing in this game is kind of atrocious.
Oh, really?
The music is loud. Like, and I'm someone who I kind of like to turn the music down a little bit so I can actually hear the sound effects, but the sound and the music feel like they're kind of fighting for your attention.
And I'm guessing there are not sliders.
No,
at this
I don't.
point.
I can't think of any Game Boy Advance game that had mixing options. It probably would have been too technically. Like, I'm sure you could have done it on the Game Boy Advance, but it probably would have been one of those things that just wasn't worth it. So you typically didn't have options like that on the Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo's not known for giving us many settings in general, but thankfully that does seem to be something they've implemented more recently.
They didn't implement that in Super Mario Odyssey, come to think of it. I remember the mixing in Odyssey felt off. And that was an instance where I felt like the music should have been louder.
Wow.
So
yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, Nintendo, just let me kind of fine tune it so that I can have the best experience for me.
Right. Okay. Speaking of the best experience for you, let's talk about Zero Mission as a whole with our impressions of it compared to Metroid for NES and other games in the series. I gotta say, I think this is at least twice as good as the original Metroid.
I think that's far too conservative of a number, Scott. I think it's a lot better than the original. Like, a lot of those old NES games are just really hard to go back to. Like the original Legend of Zelda, this might get me skewered by some of our fans, but I don't think the original Legend of Zelda is worth going back to unless you're a hardcore Zelda fan or like someone who likes to have the historical context for these games. And if that's what you're like and you want to experience gaming history, then yeah, go ahead and play the original Metroid. It's worth your time as sort of a if it's just sort of a connoisseur kind of thing. But if you're just like looking for a good time, you're looking to play something you'll enjoy, Zero Mission's where is definitely how you should start off the Metroid series.
Yes, I love it for preservation point of view, that there's actually a game available on an HD console that kind of preserves this first entry in the Metroid series in a way with better graphics, better music, better controls, better gameplay, more content, and I'll have it forever, presumably, as long as my Wii U keeps turning on.
Yep. And when you beat the campaign, beat the game one time, it unlocks the original NES Metroid. So remember when Nintendo used to do that? They would just package old games with more recent games.
Yeah. Do you remember there was Xevious in a Star Fox game?
Yeah.
Star Fox Assault had it. Unlockable.
You can unlock that. I never did, unfortunately, but you could.
Animal Crossing had a whole virtual console in it, basically.
Yeah.
Man, those were the times.
Yeah. Now, I will say that if you want to play the original NES Metroid, I would not recommend the version don't buy this game just to get that, because it felt even more sluggish than I was used to.
Huh.
So I don't think the Game Boy Advance is quite able to emulate it, or the emulator that they made for it, or whatever, wasn't quite up to snuff. But if you want to get this game, and that's a bonus.
I wonder if that's the same case for the Metroid NES cartridge that came out on Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, I would be curious to see if that was the case. Not enough to hunt one down, but...
So obviously, as far as Metroid 1 goes, this is the winner. How would you stack it up against the other 2D games?
That's a hard one. Like, I think in terms of controls, one of the things I noticed is the controls are a lot snappier than something like Super. Super is kind of floaty and weird. And it has a much more traditional structure than Fusion. So it is like, if you liked the way Fusion controlled, but you preferred sort of the setting and aesthetic and kind of the gameplay style of Super, this is going to be the game for you. I'd have to replay Super to see if this displaces it, but I don't know. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I would say it's really good. It's definitely up there as one of the best 2D Metroid experiences out there.
Yeah, it puts it very up high, close with Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, to the point where it makes it difficult to rank. And I think that's a plenty big compliment on its own. I think the boss content is a little light, though, to be honest. I feel like the other games have a few more big encounters. And this one, it feels like, I mean, they even kind of telegraph it with Kraid and Ridley statues that you have to activate in order to move on. And it really reminds you, oh, there's only 2 main bosses before the final one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if bosses are your thing, then I think Fusion is probably your best bet. Because Fusion had tons of bosses. Super, I don't think had tons and tons of bosses. Like, I think it had more than Zero Mission, but not by a whole lot.
Right. And, it depends what you're looking for. Like we talked about with the ending sequence, can be a little divisive. So you have to weigh, do I want bosses? Do I want that kind of stealth dread feeling? And make a decision from there. Probably the best way to go would just be play them all. Why not?
Yep. Honestly, I would say you can't go wrong with just playing through the entire series, especially since we now have remakes of the first 2. Despite me getting on the AM2R bandwagon, Samus Returns is an excellent remake or reimagining, if you will. And my only real gripe with it is that missile tanks don't give you 5 missiles, they give you 2, and so you have 271 at the end, some weird crazy number that makes no sense.
I can Photoshop a screenshot of that for you if you'd like, give you a nice even 250 or something. So any closing thoughts on Zero Mission?
I liked it.
Worth $8. Here, do your 2 review kind of considerations that you would with.
Okay, so in terms
video.
of rating, I would say I liked it a lot, especially the early game, because man, that is just like a dopamine hit at one after another. It's very snappy, very fast paced, a massive improvement on the original. So yes, I liked it a lot. It's a great game, and if you get on the Wii U Virtual Console for $8, definitely worth your money.
Cool. I know quite a few people plugged in their Wii U's to relive this, and it's fun to see that previous generation dusted off a little bit, because there's a pretty good offering on the eShop. I was looking around in there seeing what else I should buy before it gets shut down. Really interesting that you can download DS games and everything onto it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a coworker who he experienced the Zelda DS games for the first time on the Wii U.
Oh, there's one puzzle that I'm really curious how it gets done. Probably just by hitting the home button, but there's a genius Zelda puzzle where you actually close the DS to stamp something from the top screen onto the bottom screen. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. It's great going down Metroid memory lane. And again, just so excited for the new game coming out. Metroid Dread is October 8th. Almost feels like I'm getting a cut for promoting that. But no, really just super excited that the series is back. So it's a good time to be a Metroid fan. You can follow us on social media at 2ButtonCrew, spell out 2, TWO. And we have a blog with a lot of great articles that are still relevant to this day. Go to 2buttoncrew.com to read lots of Glen's and my own writing. And we have one more plug. What's that, Glen?
And also, if you have any ideas for an episode, or you have an old classic Nintendo game that you would like to hear our thoughts and opinions on, then go ahead and submit ideas for an episode either in the comments to this podcast or video if you're watching it on YouTube, or you can send me an email at glen@twobuttoncrew.com.
Thanks for doing that, everybody. We'd love to hear your ideas and make podcasts based on suggestions from the crew. So hope you guys have a great time playing Metroid, whether that's Zero Mission or Dread or whatever that would be. Enjoy yourself, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye.